If you keep thinking and feeling in the same way over and over again, you'll program your brain and condition your body into a state of being. So most beliefs become unconscious states of being. We've lived it enough. It's no longer a conscious process. Now it's subconsciously programmed.
Welcome to the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacy Phillips. As a leading manifestation advisor with a process that's, radically different from the old New Age model, mine is rooted in psychology, neuroscience, and my energetic gifts. I created this podcast to help you expand your subconscious limiting beliefs about the potential of deserving the manifestations you're calling in. Therefore, you're tuning into this podcast series to show your subconscious that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, you've already started the process of manifesting it. Welcome back. We have such a good episode today, one that I've been very excited for, one that I'm very proud of. But before we get into that, I don't think I actually updated anybody here. So we had launched the question service in August to see if it was something that everybody resonated with. And it was a resounding yes. We did a survey and everyone was like, please keep this. So for anybody who doesn't remember, it was the question service that was asked in a survey for us to do. So for $25, you can ask any question that's coming up for you in your manifestation practice. So it's a little bit different than supported, because supported, we pick the largest general questions we're getting from members. This is your specific question, anything that's coming up in your manifestation practice, something you heard on the podcast that you want to take your practice deeper. So you fill out this extensive form and then you receive a voice note back from a coach from 2 to 5 minutes where they extensively explain the energetics of what's going on for you, give you the action steps, and tell you which workshops or what work you should be doing to move through the block you're having. So if you're stuck at any point in your practice, we really wanted this to be an accessible way to basically have hand-holding, so there's no excuse anymore to stop and not continue. So I haven't updated that we did keep it. So anybody interested, we have that available and it's linked below and we'll be continuing it for you. Also, a really cool thing. So we have been spicing up all of the workshops, working very closely with Dr. Tara, which is super exciting, namely how to manifest inner child, shadow, and the daily reprogramming exercise, so that she could go through and make it as neuroscience accurate and psychology accurate as possible. So you're going to see a lot of new shifts that are even deeper coming through and launching in November, and a brand new, updated, incredibly cool and user-friendly daily practice that'll be launching in October. One thing that she's been teaching us throughout the process: to truly overwrite an old neural pathway, you have to have accountability, period. And so we kept thinking internally, how do we do this? And we'll explain it deeper in the new daily practice that will be launching at the end of October. However, our marketing director, Grace, came up with a great concept that we can send out text to our community. So this text service will be for any tips that we want to educate on, reminders, things such as it's the full moon, do unblocked full moon, personal notes from me, any downloads I'm getting. You'll be the first to receive any special promos or deals. So if that's something you want to be a part of, definitely go to tobemagnetic.com/text TBM and sign up. It's completely free. And this will be the first step of how we can provide more accountability for anybody. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out now. tobemagnetic.com/text TBM. So today's episode is one that I'm sure many have been waiting for and requesting. I certainly have. So today is Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I greatly, greatly admire. He's an international lecturer, researcher, corporate consultant, author, and educator. He also just casually happens to be a New York Times bestselling author for Becoming Supernatural, How Common People Are Doing the Uncommon, his latest book. My first book that I ever read by him was Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I think it's the most common, and I think most people in this community probably know of that one. He also wrote Evolve Your Brain and You Are the Placebo. He has online courses, in-person seminars. I think that's the one everyone's been excited about who is a fan and familiar with him, because he is really shaking the health industry with spontaneous healings, which we go deeply into today. How to spontaneously heal and heal your body. He also has workshops, and he hosts the series Rewired with Joe Dispenza on Gaia TV. You've heard me mention his work on this podcast many a times, as it truly aligns with all of the science that backs our work at TBM. So I know everybody in this community will find something from today that expands you during this episode. Let's get into it. So welcome, Dr. Joe. I'm so excited to kick off this podcast with you. I would have to say I've been following your work now for 3 years. But what I want to kick off with, which I'm sure it's a story you're so sick of talking about at this point, but I think it really is a great introduction to how you became to where you are now, doing what you're doing. Can you tell us of your story of recovery and how you discovered this work?
Sure. In 1986, I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California, and I was on the biking portion of the race, and there was a police officer standing on the corner, and he was waving me on to make a right-hand turn, and he had his back to the oncoming traffic. He wasn't looking behind him, and so I made the turn to pass two cyclists on the corner, and when I turned the corner, a four-wheel drive Bronco going about 55 miles an hour catapulted me out of my bike, and I wound up fracturing 6 vertebrae in my spine, T8, T9, T10, T11, T12, and L1. And when you land squarely on your rump, the compressive forces compress the vertebrae, and the volume of those bone fragments have to go somewhere, so they went back towards my spinal cord. And the very top segment, T8, the neural arch, the arch that the spinal cord passes through, had broken kind of like a pretzel. So I had multiple compression fractures of my spine. I had bone fragments on my cord, and I had cord compression. And a typical procedure for this is a surgery called the Harrington rod surgery. And that's basically they cut out the back parts of your vertebrae, and it's called a laminectomy, and they screw in these long stainless steel rods. And in my case, it would be from the base of my neck to the base of my spine, and then they paste some bone fragments from your hip over the top. And when they drill in the screws into the segments, the rods act to cantilever the spinal column off the spinal cord. And so I had 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, and they told me I'd probably never walk again unless I had this radical surgery. Anyway, in 1986, Lacy, it wasn't really common that you told your doctor that you were going to go against the surgery, but I just kept having this thought in my head that the power that made the body heals the body. And I didn't know how that was going to happen, but I made a decision to leave the hospital, and I thought that there's an intelligence within us that gives us life, and it keeps our heart beating, and it digests our food, and it knows how to organize and to heal, but there's only a certain limit to what it could do. But I thought if it was an intelligence, it would have a consciousness, and consciousness is awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So it has to be paying attention to how I think and how I feel. So I decided that I wasn't going anywhere, I wasn't doing anything. I was pretty much laying face down, and I was in trouble. I had some neurological problems. And I thought, well, listen, I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to design a template. I'm going to show this intelligence exactly what I want. And when I'm satisfied with what I've created, I'll surrender my image, my plan to this greater mind, and it knows how to heal. I don't know how to heal. I'll allow it to do it for me. And the second thing is I won't let any thought slip by my awareness that I don't want to experience. Now, from an intellectual standpoint, that seems really easy. But when you're faced with crisis or trauma, we tend to focus on the things we don't want to have happen instead of the things we do want to have happen. So every day I'd close my eyes and I'd start reconstructing my spine. And then, 10 minutes into it, I'd start thinking about living in a wheelchair or being on addictive drugs the rest of my life, or should I sell my home? Should I sell my practice? And I catch myself, and I kept realizing that I was focusing on what I didn't want to have happen. So I'd start all over again, and I get frustrated, and I get angry, get impatient, and things got worse. And I went through probably 6.5 weeks, this dark night of the soul, weighing what I know against what I didn't know, and taking a chance and possibility. But it took me like 3.5 hours to go through the reconstruction process, and I was never satisfied with it until one day I went through the whole entire thing, and it felt like I hit a tennis ball in the sweet spot. Something clicked, I clicked, something changed, and what took me 3.5 hours to do every day, all of a sudden it got easier and easier, and I was able to do it in a shorter amount of time. Well, I didn't know that I was increasing my attention span to stay present and focus on what I was doing. And also I was firing and wiring new circuits in my brain and creating the neural architecture of a level of mind that I was able to revisit every day. And all of a sudden I started noticing that my body started changing. I started getting better. I started to feel less pain. I had more sensation, more motor function. And I started correlating the changes that I was making inside of me with the effect that I was producing outside of me. Now I was paying attention to what I was doing, and I was doing it with ambition and excitement and optimism and enthusiasm. And in 10.5 weeks, I was back on my feet, and I was back in my practice and back to training at 12 weeks. And they wanted to put me in a body cast for a year when I finally was able to ambulate. And gosh, I never wore the body brace. I tried it on once and took it off, and I just made a deal with myself. And the deal was, and still is, if I was ever able to walk again, I'd study this concept of mind over matter and the mind-body connection, and pretty much doing that since 1986.
That's incredible. And I think for the common listener, one question that came to mind right away was, during all of that, I imagine you must have been in a tremendous amount of pain. And so as you're creating this new, I'll say like neural architecture of what your body is and is becoming, how were you able, while going through that sequencing, to override that with the level of pain? I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, if I knew then what I know now, I would have certainly been a great coach to myself, because when we study functional scans and people in the process of change and transformation, our research team, when we look at this concept of being present, this creative moment, when you're creative, something really amazing happens. You forget about yourself. You're so present in the moment that the circuits in your brain that process sensory information from your body, motor function, you tend to get still and you kind of move into a trance, and you forget about the lawnmower outside and the dog barking across the street. You dissociate from your body. You dissociate from all of the elements in your outer environment that you identify with, that becomes your personality or identity. And for some reason, you're not thinking about the next moment, what could happen, and preoccupied with the future, or you're not emotionally re-embracing the past. You fall into this elegant moment, the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And that's the moment where possibility exists. And if paying attention is being present, and it's a skill, just like golf or tennis, if you are going to begin to make great strides in your inner world, well, the moment the thought in your mind becomes the experience enriches circuitry in the brain, and experience produces emotion. And so if thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body, and how you think and how you feel creates your state of being, we can change our state of being by thought alone. And the stronger the emotion we feel when we do this, the more altered we feel inside of us, the more we pay attention to the pictures in our mind. And in a sense, we begin to brand the circuitry of that inner event so that the brain and body looks like it already has happened. And that's what the latest science can show us. So now, in that moment, the person is remembering their future, and they will begin to think within the circuits of that future event, and they will begin to feel within the emotions of that future. And when you feel the emotions of your future, the cool thing about it is you stop looking for it. You're no longer separate from it. You feel like it's happening to you in the present moment, because the body is so objective that it doesn't know the difference between a real life experience that creates an emotion and an emotion that you create or fabricate by thought alone. To the body, it's actually the same. So the person who wakes up in the morning and begins to think about those problems are memories that are etched in the brain, that are connected to certain people and certain objects and certain things at certain times and places. The brain is a record of the past. So the moment a person starts thinking about their problems, they're thinking in the past. And every one of those problems has an emotion associated with it. So the moment they feel unhappy, the moment they feel resentful, the moment they feel fear, now the body's in the past. So then the person then begins to condition their brain and body into the past, because it only takes a thought and a feeling, a memory and emotion, a stimulus and response to start the conditioning process. So when it comes time to change, a person has difficulty getting beyond the process of living in a state of being that's connected to the past. And most people then, in order for them to create a new future, they have to get beyond the emotions of the past.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we have so much to get into with that. One question that came to mind while you were explaining that, when you do your scans and you're doing the research on it and tests, what brainwave state is that?
I'll give you the simple version.
Okay. The layman's.
So you, like right now, you and I are hanging out and we're talking, and your thinking brain, that walnut on the outside with all those folds and valleys, that's your neocortex. That's the seat of your conscious awareness. That's the seat of your intellect. That is the identity, the personality, the autobiographical self that has stitches neurologically from things we've learned and experienced in our life. And that thinking brain, when your eyes are open and you're awake and conscious, is busy integrating all the information that's coming in through your visual field, through what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you're feeling, what you're tasting, what you're smelling. All of that information is causing the brain to try to create meaning, create coherence between what's going on in your inner world and what's going on in your outer world. And because there's so much information in the process, if you were to measure the brain during that state, we would call that beta brainwave patterns. And so low-level beta is healthy. But if I said to you, Lacy, come to dinner tonight and there'll be 15 guests and I want you to remember all their names when I introduce you to them. Now, all of a sudden, your brain would kind of perk up a little bit more. If you were about to give a lecture and you knew the content, but just before the lecture, you were a little bit vigilant, you would be in what's called mid-range beta. You just turn the light bulb up a little bit brighter and pay a little bit more attention, a little arousal so that you're more aware. But when you're angry, when you're frustrated, when you're impatient, when you're resentful, now your brain moves into what's called a high beta processing. And in high beta, the brain is in emergency mode. And some people get stuck in this overly analytical state. And in high beta, no new information can enter the nervous system that isn't equal to the emotion the person is experiencing. Why? Because if you're in fear, if you're in anger, if you're in pain, that arousal then is causing you to live in an emergency state. And some people live in stress or live in survival and live in that emergency state, and they tap all their body's resources. Now, that thinking brain is healthy, but when it's in that super aroused state, now we overthink, we overanalyze, we obsess. So then learning, we've done so much research on this, that teaching people how to change the way their brain functions with a formula that we've actually seen that works for anybody who practices it, that when they begin to stop their analytical mind, they start slowing down their thinking brain. If they can dissociate from their body, if they can forget about their environment and they can no longer be preoccupied with time, the brain begins to slow down in what's called an alpha state. Now, in alpha, that's the imaginary world. That's the creative state. In alpha, your inner world starts becoming more real than your outer world. You can hear your outer world, but it's not as important to you. So in alpha, we can call that like a dreaming creative state. Now, when people start feeling so safe that they can relax into the present moment, their body can feel so safe that it no longer is worried about the next moment. You see this great state of what's called theta brainwave states take place. And now in theta, the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is so wide open that you can reprogram the subconscious into more favorable states. And so we work on teaching people through a formula to be able to change their brainwaves. And that's the purpose of meditation. The purpose of meditation, one of the purposes, is to get beyond the analytical mind. And what separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. So we learned then that when people begin to slow their brainwaves down, we're not just looking for any kind of alpha brainwaves. We're looking for coherence in the alpha brainwaves. Now, when you're in beta, high beta, and you're shifting your attention from one person to another problem, to another thing, to another place, because you're trying to control and predict everything in your life, each one of those elements has a neurological network in the brain. So the arousal causes those different circuits to fire as you shift your attention. And like a lightning storm in the cloud, the brain begins to function out of order very incoherently. When the brain's incoherent, we're incoherent. When the brain's not working right, we're not working right. So in survival and in stress, you narrow your focus on everything physical or material because that's where the danger is. So we said, what if we taught people to do the opposite? What if they just broaden their focus or open their focus? Instead of focusing on an object or something material, have them focus on nothing. And the act of sensing space and opening their awareness begins to slow their brainwaves down into very coherent, orderly brainwave patterns. In other words, the brain starts to synchronize. And different compartments of the brain that were once disintegrated or incoherent begin to organize, to begin to synchronize. And what syncs in the brain links in the brain. And now the person starts feeling more whole. So that elegant moment is the door where they begin to get beyond those beta brainwave patterns, and low-level alpha and theta is just when they can really start doing some important reprogramming.
And so essentially what you're saying is through your formula that you're basically retraining people to live in that theta state consciously during their waking life.
No, I would say that there's nothing wrong with your analytical mind. Like, I love my analytical mind. If I'm navigating ethically in my life, if I'm learning something new, I got to weigh what I know against what I don't know. I got to build a model of understanding. The analytical mind is a healthy thing for us. I mean, that what makes us decide if we believe in a television commercial or not, or what we should believe in. So the analytical mind is a filter, so it's healthy. But when the brain goes into the high beta states, it's really difficult to change because in high beta, you're separate from the operating system. So then when you begin to make changes and you begin to create, all you want to be able to do is open that door and be able to do it properly so that you can slip past it and reprogram. Then you come back and you can vacillate between beta and alpha. In other words, I watch in my audiences when I'm teaching people, I'm talking and they're listening and they're present and they're in beta, and then all of a sudden they stop and they turn their head and they get glazy and they move into trance. And all of a sudden they're just frozen and they're thinking about what I said and they're freezing an image in their brain and they're moving from beta to alpha. And they're consolidating that information as a hologram neurologically in their brain. That's how we learn. Alpha allows us to pause enough to freeze the picture in our inner world. But if you're in high beta, it's not a time to learn. It's not a time to communicate. It's not a time to meditate. It's time to run, fight, and hide. And so most people then think that when they're living by the arousal of the stress hormones, that they have no control over how they think and feel. And what we do is we teach people that they do, that they can self-regulate, that there are ways for them to practice that so that they don't spend the whole entire rest of the day in the same emotional state.
Love it. And I think you already answered this in so many words, but I also think it's really important to highlight, when you were lying there and you were having the epiphany that there is the intelligence of the body, so it's getting out of its own way. And I think this is obviously, I know the answer, I think is going to be stress and everything you just covered. But essentially, what do you think the number one block to homeostasis is?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of homeostasis. The stress response is what the body innately does to return itself back to order. So whether it's a physical stress like a trauma, an accident, injury, a chemical stress like a virus, a bacteria, blood sugar levels, a food allergy, a pesticide, a pollutant, a toxin, or an emotional stress like a traffic jam, an internet connection, single parenting, second mortgages, family tragedies. All of those things knock the brain and body out of balance. But if you think about it, most stress ends up as psychological or emotional stress. And 75 to 90% of every person that walks into a healthcare facility in the Western world walks in because of psychological and emotional stress. So then our perception of the environment determines our responses. Mm-hmm. So then if I say to you, Lacy, why are you upset today? And you say, I'm upset because of this person or this circumstance. What you're really saying is someone or something in your outer environment is controlling the way you feel and the way you think. Now, anything that controls us in terms of our feelings or our thinking, we're victims to our environment. So the person who's reacting to all the environmental cues is actually weakening their own immune response. They're weakening their autonomic nervous system, because if you're mobilizing all of this energy for some threat in your outer world, real or imagined, you have no energy in your inner world for growth and repair. So if you keep the stress response going for an extended period of time, no organism can live in emergency mode for that long, because what was once now the imbalance becomes the new balance. And the chronic effects of the long-term hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease. So then human beings, we can think about our problems and we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone. Well, if the stress response pushes the genetic buttons that creates disease and you can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, that means your thoughts can literally make you sick. And if those chemicals arouse the body and people become dependent on those emotions and they need the problems and conditions in their life to reaffirm some addiction to some emotion, they'll become addicted to the life they don't even like. And if we can turn on that stress response just by thought alone, we can become addicted to our own thoughts. And this is why change becomes so hard. So teaching people then how to catch themselves the moment they feel that and understand that they do have the tools to begin to change their emotional response, valid or justified, it's still weakening the organism. So that when people start moving back into homeostasis, the side effect is that their pain levels go away, their food allergies disappear, they sleep better, they have less insomnia, they're happier. That's just by regulating your own homeostasis and emotional responses.
And so in this community, and I think you got to talk to my friend Luke's story about all of this a little bit as well, but in this community, 5G, right? We keep hearing about 5G, blue lights, radiation. And I mean, you're practicing and teaching something that's mind over matter. For the person who's afraid of that or the towers going in, what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like the code you've cracked is like above and beyond any worries with that.
Well, this is a bottle of wine in a 2-hour conversation, but
totally.
I will tell you this. My interest is to teach people that they are the creators of their life and not the victims of their life. So a person who is in fear because of 5G or in fear because of viruses or in fear because of whatever the conditions are in the environment, then just by pure objectivity, their fear is actually weakening their ability to tolerate an environment. The fear is actually weakening the response to any condition in their environment, so they're more susceptible to their environment. But what we teach is, what if the way you think and feel begins to produce outcomes in your life? And if you change the way you think and feel, will it begin to produce effects in your outer world? And so the person then who wakes up every morning and says, okay, my personality creates my personal reality. And my personality is made up of how I think, how I act, and how I feel. So if I'm going to create a new personal reality, that means I got to change my personality. I can't stay the same person if I want to create a new life. So let me start thinking about what I've been thinking about and decide to become conscious of a lot of my unconscious thoughts. Let me examine how I speak, how I act. Let me look at the emotions that keep me connected to the past. And let me decide if these emotions belong in my future. So then the act of observing those states of mind and body does something really amazing. It begins to separate you from the hardwired programs of thinking those thoughts over and over again, to become aware of those habituations of actions and responses emotionally. So then the moment you're observing those states, you're no longer those programs. You're an awareness observing them. Then if you said, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And the act of your attention with your intention begins to fire and wire new circuits, installing hardware. Keep doing that enough times, and that hardware will become a software program, and that will be the new voice in your head that says, I can, it is possible. You said, how am I going to act with my children today at work? How am I going to act? How am I going to behave one day in one lifetime? How would greatness act? And you closed your eyes and began to rehearse who you were going to be when you open your eyes. The research on mental rehearsal shows that you can begin to install new circuits in your brain to look like you've already had the experience. Keep doing it, and the hardware will become a software program, and you'll start naturally acting that way. That's what mental rehearsal does. It makes the brain look like you've already had the experience. You're priming the brain for the future instead of the past. And if you said, let me teach my body emotionally what my future would feel like before it happens. That means you're not going to wait for your wealth to feel abundance, or your healing to feel gratitude, or your new relationship to feel love. That's the old model of reality of cause and effect. What if you said, I want my body to feel the emotion, and the stronger the emotion I feel, the more I believe in that future. If you kept practicing that over and over, it would begin to become familiar to you. In other words, you would begin to become that person. So then when you do this properly, you're creating a new personality. And all of a sudden, when you start seeing shifts, synchronicities, serendipities, coincidences happening in your life, and you're not doing anything, now all of a sudden, you're going to start paying attention to what you're doing inside of you. And you're going to realize that you are actually creating the effects outside of you. Now, that's a great game to play, because that's turning the battleship around. And now we're believing less that we're victims in our life and more that we are the creators in our life. And that's not something that you get in one stroke. It takes practice in staying aware and catching yourself when you go unconscious. And the word meditation literally means to become familiar with. So you could become familiar with the old self to such a degree that you don't go unconscious and return back to that person. And then you keep practicing becoming familiar with a new self. And if you keep practicing that, you will become that person. So we overcome our limited self to become someone else.
So I'm quickly interrupting this episode to invite you, if you're ready to start your manifestation journey, or if anything you've heard in our manifestation episodes has piqued your interest, to begin. We have a la carte workshops in everything from the basics bundle, which is what we recommend to everyone who starts. It's the formula that actually teaches you how to manifest, unblocked inner child, and unblocked shadow. We also have a la carte workshops on love and money. But the real gem is the Pathway membership, because it encompasses every single workshop we have. It's a year-long membership with full access to the few a la carte offerings we have, and exclusive workshops not available anywhere else, such as the daily practice, which is what everybody in the Pathway uses, hopefully at least 3 times a week to daily, in order to truly create the new neural pathways that one needs in order to manifest, and houses the library of our deep imaginings, which is our unique hypnosis process that allows you to get into your subconscious and overwrite those old neural pathways, creating the new ones. You can use our special code, EXPANDED, all caps, EXPANDED, to receive $20 off your first a la carte workshop purchase, or $20 off your first month of the Pathway. Again, that's all caps, EXPANDED, EXPANDED. Okay, now back to the episode. For the scientifically, I would say in this community, the geeks, the very curious, will you explain the quantum physics of what you're teaching?
Sure. Again, let's.
I'm really bringing the easy questions.
No. Listen, I never tire of this because, if you were to ask me a year ago if I thought that I would ever be seeing what we witnessed in the last year in terms of people healing from all kinds of health conditions, we're talking about blind people seeing, not once, not twice, numerous times, deaf people hearing, people with stage 4 cancers going into remission, rare genetic disorders disappearing, Parkinson's disease, MS. We've seen tumors disappear right before our eyes. It's just, you ask that person, like, where is the disease? They'll tell you it's in the old person. They're literally somebody else. So I never thought that I would be seeing these changes. But science is the contemporary language of mysticism. It is science that demystifies the mystical. And I think that when you start talking tradition or religion or culture or even spirituality, you're going to divide an audience because someone's going to shut off when they hear a certain word, or they're going to have the wrong understanding of what that word means. But if you use science, science says that this is absolutely the truth. So how are we going to create a community, a language for people to understand what possibility is? Well, you got to combine quantum physics. If it's quantum physics says that your subjective mind literally on some level has an effect on the objective world, that mind and matter are so connected that it's impossible to separate the two. So then if you're going to observe an outcome in your life and you keep observing that outcome, will it begin to produce measurable effects? Well, the only science that's able to explain that is quantum physics. And the quantum field is an invisible field of energy. In other words, you can't see it with your senses. You only perceive matter in three-dimensional reality with your senses. But this invisible field of energy and frequency that is connecting everything material, as you get closer and closer to the causation of matter or the effect of matter, you see that you're getting down to nothing physical. In other words, the atom is 99.99999% nothing. It's energy. It's a vortex of energy. So then if mind has an effect on matter, then we better understand mind as well. And what level of mind are we routinely observing or expecting to see every day in our life? So if we can construct an understanding about the quantum world, and I could create an understanding of a way to dissociate all of your attention from everything physical and material, and you could understand the path or the map to get to that point. And instead of creating from matter to matter, and when you create matter to matter, we always try to force and control outcomes. And everything we create in three-dimensional reality as matter affecting matter will take time. And you can teach a person how to reach that elegant moment where they're not in the familiar past or the predictable future. They're in the unknown, the present moment. And they understand the formula on how to do that. And they start creating from the field instead of from matter, and they have a model of understanding to do that. Then when they're creating from the field instead of from matter, they should exert greater effects on the nature of reality if they're creating from the field instead of from matter to matter. And so the quantum field is a great way to challenge a person's mind to have them see there's more to reality than what their senses tell them. And that this invisible field, where subjective mind begins to produce an effect on the objective world, can explain everything from a cut healing to a miracle taking place in a person's life. And we can't even explain how a cut can heal without explaining that quantum physics has a vitalistic component to it. So we use the quantum model of reality to show people that this invisible field does exert greater effects if they know how to connect to that field.
And you've already alluded to, what you've been seeing over this past year, and you have the week-long retreat, and, I get to see on your social media, and I've seen on YouTube videos, these miraculous, what you call spontaneous healings that are taking place. But I love, and we've touched on a little bit, but it seems like very important pieces to that are certainly the coherent heart space, the future self, and that elegant moment. Talking about those all together, even though we've touched on them, what do you have to say about that contributing to spontaneous healings?
I love your question, Lacy. I'm on the journey of discovery here. And, we've done over 8,000 brain scans. We've done over 5,000 heart rate variability measurements. We've measured gene expression. We've measured immune regulation. We've measured telomere lengths and longevity. We've measured neurotransmitters. We've measured energy in the room, energy around people's bodies, just to begin to understand that there's evidence to show that you can change how your brain works in a week. You could make your heart work better. You could lengthen your life. You could change your gene expression. You could strengthen your immune system in 4 days by 50%. We have the data to actually show that it's possible. So if we're interested in creating a model of understanding that supports a person's ability to create and understand when they're there and when they're not, creation requires a clear intention, that is a vision of the future. And when you ask yourself an open-ended question like, what would it be like to be healthy? Or what would it be like to lose 25 pounds or to get in shape? What would it be like to be happy? What would it be like to be in a new relationship? What would it be like to have the job of my dreams? If you ask that question, I call that a frontal lobe question. Now, your frontal lobe is the creative center of your brain. It is the architect. And when you ask that question, you switch on the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe has connections to all other parts of the brain. And it wants to answer that question because it's the boss, it's the CEO, it's the symphony leader. So then it looks out over the landscape of the brain, and it only has what's stored in there based on something you've learned, a book you've read, a video you've watched, and experiences that you've had. And so it calls up the different associated neurological networks, and it begins to seamlessly piece them together. When those neurons and neural networks begin to fire in tandem, you get a picture in your mind, and you're selecting a new potential in the quantum field. You're selecting a new possibility. That is called intention. And we can say from an energetic standpoint, a coherent brain will send out a very coherent signal into the field. Now, for the truly passionate person, if they're engaged in this process, and we've all done this, the thought in your mind literally becomes the experience, and you begin to feel the emotion of that future before it happens. You start to feel enthusiasm, inspiration. You start to feel joy. Now, when you feel that elevated emotion before the experience, that heart-centered emotion, you're giving your body a taste, a sampling of the future before it happens. Now, when you combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion, if the thought sends the signal out and the feeling draws the event back to you, or the thought is the electrical charge in the quantum field and the feeling is the magnetic charge, when the person starts feeling an elevated emotion, as I said earlier, their body's so objective that it's believing that that future reality is happening in the present moment. So then, if it requires a coherent heart, then we better practice. If you're going to believe in a future that you're creating with all of your heart, it better be open and activated. So we teach people then, when they're resentful, when they're frustrated, when they're impatient, when they're angry, they're stepping on the gas pedal and they're stepping on the brake at the same time, and the heart is beating really strongly out of order. There's incoherence in the heart. Energy leaves the heart, and we stop trusting. Energy is moving lower to our lower centers. And so it takes a little practice to begin to create heart coherence. And when you start feeling elevated emotions like gratitude and appreciation and joy and inspiration, the heart starts moving back into coherence, back into balance. And when that occurs, two things happen that are really important. Number one, once energy makes it to the heart, it naturally propulses a wave of energy to the brain. And we've measured this thousands of times. We see coherence in alpha move into the brain. So once energy makes it to the heart, we know that it's going to change the brain into a more creative state. The second thing that happens is when the heart gets coherent, it produces a field, a magnetic field around the body that's up to 3 meters wide. Now you're emitting a signal, you're emitting an energy, and energy is frequency, and frequency carries information. if you're suffering, that can't hold the thought. That energy can't hold the thought of your healing or your wealth. It holds the thought of other thoughts like pain and whatever else. So then a clear intention and elevated emotion then begins to change a person's energy. And when you change your energy, you change your life. Now, here's the caveat. You can't do it, move into that state, feel an elevated emotion, and then get in traffic and start reacting or start yelling at your coworker or start getting angry or frustrated. You just disconnected from the energy of your future and you return back to the energy of your past. And if you say to me it was because of that person or that circumstance, I'd say, oh no, you're back to the unconscious program of victimization. That something in your outer environment is controlling the way you think and feel. So our job then is to self-regulate through our entire day and maintain this state of being, independent of the conditions in our environment, independent of the cravings and the habituations of our body, and independent of time. And if you're able to change your energy throughout your entire day, get ready, because you will start to see those synchronicities, those opportunities, those serendipities, the feedback in your environment to show you that you are the creator of your life. And when you start to see those events taking place in your life, the excitement, the inspiration, the joy that you feel, you use that energy to create the next experience. And this is when people start to see, wow, the opportunities are getting better. And people in our work, I don't make them meditate. I don't want them to have to do it. I want them to say, the magic in my life is so incredible. I don't want to miss a day because I don't want the magic to end. So then when a person's practicing getting familiar with the emotions of their future and they can sustain heart coherence and nobody or nothing is moving them off that state, they're connected to their future. Once they lose the feeling of their future, they would just return back to their past. It makes sense then they're going to start looking for when it's going to happen because they're separate from it. In other words, if you feel the emotions of your future, you would never be looking for it because you would feel like it already happened. And that's when those events begin to become more natural. They start coming to us. We're no longer having to go and get them and move our body through space, and that takes time. Somehow we are a magnet or a vortex, and we start to see then the combination of a coherent brain and a coherent heart is actually what creates a Wi-Fi signal that begins to have a person be connected to that invisible field. And I want everybody to experience that. And nobody's so special to be excluded from that phenomenon.
Yeah. I mean, I practiced it. I lose it. I need to dive in deeper, but it is such a magical place to continue to revert back to live in. And that's why this conversation's so inspiring. I love too what I've been seeing at the week-long retreats, that it appears that you bring up alumni who have healed, who have used this process and they've healed. And in the brand, we call them expanders. It's our seed of belief, what's possible. And I love that you say they're just average Joe people. It's not like they're untouchable, famous or X, Y, and Z. Can you talk about the neuroscience behind that and just what it's doing to help speed up this process for somebody?
Yeah, I mean, we had such momentum, before the global pandemic. We were working with universities around the United States now and empirical researchers, physicians that are coming and, doubtful, and then they see a person stand on the stage with stage 4 cancer, diagnosed 3 months ago, and then they have their scans and there's no evidence of cancer, or a person who had a stroke and who's on the optic nerve and they've been blind for a year and all of a sudden they're seeing normally and their scan shows that there's no longer any damage to the nerve at all. Their visual fields have restored. Now, we have evidence in our scientific research to show all the things I mentioned. And we have evidence in testimony. And evidence has become the loudest voice. So when a person stands on the stage who had Parkinson's disease, she's a 72-year-old female, she couldn't blow her nose, she couldn't swallow, she couldn't chew her food, she couldn't stand up. And in one instant, she has a significant change in one meditation. And now I don't ever plan who's going to come up. My team leaders will say, hey, I had a person in my group heal from Parkinson's. And I'll say, Did you interview her? Yes. Is it the truth? Yes. Okay. Well, have her meet me backstage. And I ask her to tell the story, and she tells the story. And she doesn't look like a vegetarian. She doesn't look young. She doesn't look buffed. She doesn't look particularly dressed in any fashionable way. She just looks like a common person. And she stands on the stage and she tells her story. And I stand on the stage and I look at the audience. And whether it's 1,000 people or 2,000 people, I'm looking out in the audience and the pin could drop and you could hear it. Nobody is moving and everybody's leaning in. And she's telling that story. And it's not a glamorous version of some Hollywood change. This is a person who may have lost everything, but there's so much truth in what she's saying. She is the living example of truth. And when a person is in the audience and they're seeing that that person is no different than anybody else, and they have a same or similar health condition, that's the 4-minute mile. We've just pierced through a veil of consciousness. And once you pierce through that veil of consciousness, you become conscious of another possibility. But it's not only a footprint in consciousness that's left by that person. There's evidence right in front of you in three-dimensional reality. Now, that person in the audience that sees what's possible, all of a sudden, they believe it's possible. And just like the 4-minute mile, where doctors said it was impossible to run physiologically a mile in under 4 minutes until someone did it. And then someone did it 2 weeks later, and there's over 1,400 people that have broken the 4-minute mile since it happened. It's the same exact thing in our work. As soon as one person pierces through that veil, we had 4 people with Raynaud's syndrome in one event heal because someone stood up and was completely healed. We had people with Parkinson's with, masks that were sensitive to their environment, were allergic to everything. People with all kinds of health conditions in one event. We asked them to go to the doctors and get the tests. So that 4-minute mile then is a footprint for other people to step into. And just like anything, this is a time in history so important right now because people are not getting answers from the government. They're not getting answers every time from religion, from journalism, from medicine. They're looking for more information. And this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is a time in history to know how. So when a person breaks through a level of consciousness and they lay that footprint down and their evidence and they stand in front of the audience and they tell the story, then we have no idea from that point forward what is going to happen. So I think evidence is the loudest voice. And when people see that because of mirror neurons, they start emulating that behavior. Their investment in what's possible increases, and they're willing to sit in those difficult meditations where their body is screaming, where they think they're doing their meditation wrong, but they're literally at the end of their emotional belief, and they're actually doing their meditation right. This is the point where they can't figure it out any longer. This is the point where they don't think they can go any further. This is where they have to all of a sudden believe in something else. And it's that elegant moment where they just stretch a little further and they go one more time without expecting anything to happen. And they finally let go and surrender, that we start seeing these amazing and incredible changes that begin to happen for people. And I never want this work to be about me. I want it to be about everybody else, that they can stand up and tell that story. Just like an infection spreads amongst the community and creates disease. I mean, health and wellness all of a sudden becomes as infectious as disease. And by the end of a week-long event, whether it's a mystical moment, whether it's a healing, whether it's a healing another person, whether it's a profound change in their emotional state, it's always worth the effort.
There's a question that I've been dying to ask, and have this tiny conversation with someone. And I know that Lewis Howes sort of broached it a little bit with you, I think in his first interview. But I have this woman on our team, and she's such a case study to me. And every interview I've heard from you, you're basically breaking down a lot of the science to kind of back up her lifestyle. So making this brief, I really want to hear your perspective. But so this woman on our team, she's a 4th-generation Christian Scientist. So epigenetic level, all she's ever known is that she's pure love, everybody's oneness. She's the perfect idea and creation of God, and never been to a doctor, never had a vaccine, never been to a hospital. and literally doesn't believe that she's matter. They believe that they're spiritual beings. And I don't know if you've ever had a chance to kind of look over the whole Christian Science model. I know Lewis House had been raised in that. But just knowing just those facts, what makes her so successful? I mean, this is somebody who's never had any problems with health. I mean, she can eat croissants and ice cream for breakfast. We've obviously been covering so much of this in this topic, but sort of what are your theories or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, no, listen, that's a great conversation because it requires a further explanation. I think that a person who is raised as a child in that belief, and a belief is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again until it becomes hardwired in your brain. And most beliefs are based on past experiences. And just like the inner event, when you have some event in your life that produces a strong emotion or you're given certain instruction, the stronger the emotion you feel from witnessing, say, somebody who healed themselves, the more you remember the event, you pay attention to the cause. And so children, because of their brainwaves, accept things a lot better at an early age. So there could be some really strong foundations in parenting that tell her that, the diseases aren't created from germs and that the body has an innate capacity to heal and we're pure light. And that becomes her belief system. And if you keep thinking and feeling in the same way over and over again, you'll program your brain and condition your body into a state of being. So most beliefs become unconscious states of being. We've lived it enough. It's no longer a conscious process. Now it's subconsciously programmed that she is immune to her environment, that she has a healthy body, and that she can eat and do whatever she wants. And I would say to the person who's learning that process that they have to do the work. In other words, if you're afraid of a germ
or 5G,
then don't expose yourself to it and think that positive thinking is going to make a difference. That's not enough, because the person who's thinking positive is really fearful that they're going to be affected. So they're thinking positive with their 5% of their conscious mind, but they're feeling really worried and fearful with their 95% of how they've been programmed. So then when a person's truly congruently in a new state of being, then just like the preacher in the deep south of the United States that moves into a state of religious ecstasy and drinks strychnine and has no biological effects, or the children of Indonesia chew on glass and swallow it and never have any internal bleeding, or the mother who walks over to the car and lifts up the car and pulls her child out. The mother isn't saying, oh God, I had carbohydrates and gluten last night, I'm not feeling it, I didn't work out in 2 weeks. That's not thought in her mind. She's literally changed her energy. So then it would require reprogramming a belief so that when the person steps out into the environment, there is no concern about it. That's not part of their neural architecture. It's not part of their memory of the past. So then I would say to the person who's been programmed to do that and who has lived that way, and that is their belief, that is their perception, then that's the way they view the world. And for them, belief and perception then have a direct effect on our physiology, on our biology. The person who has a fear of 5G, has a fear of different things, then that person should not take the chance until they're at the point where they've gone through a methodical process of overcoming certain challenges emotionally, certain challenges biologically, certain challenges in their environment, where they now say, hey, listen, I healed myself of that disease. I just don't believe that I'm going to ever get it again. Mm-hmm. Or and now that I've healed myself, is it possible that I can heal someone else? And we've seen that in our work as well. And if you heal someone else and they're in the room, can you heal someone else on the other side of the planet? Well, that's an evolution. So I think that someone who has been indoctrinated into that and someone who's lived by that, that has worked for them up until this point because it is their state of being. But ultimately, we'll all be challenged on the journey back to source with some condition in our life that challenges that belief. And that person ultimately will have a new challenge that will cause them to change and evolve their belief even further.
Yeah. And, it's so interesting because somebody like me, and I'm sure a lot of people in wellness can identify as this, we've spent so much time researching things on health, spirituality, yada, yada, yada. So in a sense, I feel like I'm so programmed with how many things are bad for you that a lot of my like overwriting in my brain has to come to exactly what, you've been covering this entire conversation, no longer allowing or actually doing the work to where your environment isn't dictating your inner environment.
Well, let's just suppose that you are the Lord of your world. You are the master of your universe. And everything you're putting in your mouth, you're making a judgment on, whether it's good or
Yep.
bad. When I ran my health clinic, I mean, the most difficult patients were the ones that were the most educated, that knew everything, and I'd walk in and say, okay, this is how it's going to go. I'm going to help you with your health. And if you decide to deviate from my recommendations, I'm going to dismiss you from care. You can go somewhere else, but I'm going to ask you to do certain things, and you're going to have to relinquish a certain amount of that control. So if you're judging everything you put in your mouth in terms of good and bad, you don't think that has an effect on your physiology, then you've given up the belief that you create your reality on some level, or at least you're responsible for yourself and your life. Not to say that I don't eat well. It's not to say I don't take care of myself. Not to say that I don't work out. I do all those things and I keep myself in balance. But if I decide to eat and have fun and do whatever, I'm not going to feel guilty, because I think the guilt is worse than the food that you consume. I mean, make your way back to balance and not have an opinion about it.
And this leads me to my very last question, which I personally have been curious about as well. But I'm going to take two extreme examples: somebody who's just been diagnosed with MS, a version of it, or somebody who's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and then they turn to your brand. What would you suggest would be a really productive, or would be the most productive way to navigate? What tools first, leading to what events?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you're diagnosed with a health condition like MS or cancer, stage 4 cancer, the problem, I think, with the diagnosis is that when you get the diagnosis, that moment becomes branded in the person's brain emotionally. In other words, the doctor says you have this health condition and you only have this amount of time to live. And they will accept, believe, and surrender to the information equal to the emotion that they're experiencing. So if they're experiencing fear or discouragement or pain, whatever the doctor says after that point can program their autonomic nervous system into an outcome. So they've been labeled with a certain condition in a particular moment in space and time, and that becomes their identity. And they keep revisiting that emotion, that event, and they're producing the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event is happening. So the person, all of a sudden, that becomes the thing that they have to overcome, that memory, that becomes their identity. So a person who truly wants to go on the journey of personal change and transformation has to be a realist. I'm a pragmatist. I don't think that it's something that is an easy thing to do. I think everybody has to work at changing who they are. And so the first step is gaining knowledge and information. Most people need a revision to understand that they're not doomed by their genes or not hardwired to be a certain way for the rest of their life, that we are marvels of adaptability and change. So if you gain knowledge and you gain information and really look to see what science is saying about possibility, and you start studying testimonies of people who have done it, all the knowledge, all the information you learn is making new connections in your brain. That's what learning is. You're stitching information into the three-dimensional tapestry of your gray matter. But if you don't review it, if you don't think about it, if you don't repeat it, those circuits prune apart within hours or days. So if learning is making connections, then remembering is maintaining them. So you got to review that information. You got to keep thinking about it. You got to keep discussing. You got to wire it in your brain. You got to install the hardware. And the more you understand what you're doing in the process and why you're doing it, the how becomes essential. It becomes meaningful, and nothing's left to conjecture or superstition or dogma. You'll know exactly what you're doing and why. So then the next step is to apply that information, to personalize it, to get some instruction, to demonstrate it, to initiate it in some way, get your body involved and do something differently. And if you can get your behaviors to match your intentions and your actions equal to your thoughts, you get your mind and body working together, you're going to have a new experience. The experience then enriches the circuits philosophically in your brain, but the end product of an experience is an emotion. Then you start feeling joy, you start feeling freedom, you start feeling love, and there goes the fear. And now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind is intellectually understood. So knowledge being for the mind, but experience being for the body, you start to embody the truth of that philosophy. And it's that emotion that begins to select and instruct new genes and begins to change your genetic destiny. So then we tell people, read, study, read the books, do the progressive workshop and the intensive workshop, the online course, practice the meditations, understand why you're doing the meditations, what could happen when you do it, so then you can surrender to the experience. So then if you've done it once, it must mean you can do it again. So then if you can repeat an experience over and over again, you'll neurochemically condition your mind and body to begin to work as one. In other words, you've done it so many times, you no longer have to think about it. Now you're moving into a state of being. You're becoming that knowledge. You're mastering that philosophy. And so then when people get to this state of what's called implicit change, they're changing the program subconsciously. And so our job is to go from philosopher to initiate to master, from mind to body to soul, from knowledge to experience to wisdom, from thinking to doing to being, to learning it with your head, applying it with your hands, and knowing it by heart. So start off with gathering knowledge. If you're interested, there's the progressive workshop and the intensive workshop, and there are online courses that you can practice, but practice them. And then if you can, once we get up and running here, a week-long event is a community of people that are all stretching for the unknown, stretching for the uncommon, and exposing yourself to that and making those changes. It takes a great effort, but the rewards are always worth it.
Yeah, I can't wait to get to that. I saw your UK one and I was like, oh, I know I can make it over there with the quarantine, but I don't think I have that full time. So I know that's going to be special. And I'm happy that at least you've got that going again, which is fantastic. But thank you so much for your time, Dr. Joe. This has been just so enlightening. And I know that this audience is going to be really grateful for this information. And I'll have listed in the intro everything to check out. Is there anything further that you recommend? Obviously, I highly suggest following your Instagram. That woman that you posted, I think it was even last week or the week before, with the cervical cancer, having that healing, that spontaneous healing was so powerful. So go ahead and give us your handle, anything else we can follow. And thank you.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, Instagram, Facebook, we have huge communities of people, and join the community, because that's the movement, and be part of a collective consciousness that does the work that believes in possibility, and then, make time out of your busy day to try it out. Try it out. I think we already know how to do this. It's just setting aside the time to say, who do I want to be when I open my eyes today? And stay conscious of who you no longer want to be, and stay conscious of who you do want to be. And when you start to see the feedback in your life, you realize that we're wired to be creators. And wow, what an amazing time to be alive right now. You don't need an authority to gain information to be able to practice this.
I agree. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a beautiful day.
Thank you, Lacy.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the episode, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, we did. And in case you're not totally ready to join the pathway yet, I wanted to share a few of our free offerings that I'll often suggest to people as a little bit of a blueprint to get them started on their manifestation journey. The first place I like to direct people completely for free is the motivation. You can see it linked below or on our homepage as our testimony library. And it's categorized by different subjects, whether you're calling in career, money, love, wellness, and much more. When you're reading about a member's experience of what they manifested, you're actually seeing to believe and showing your subconscious that that very thing is possible for you. The second place I like to direct people is to the free clarity exercise, which is also linked below. In it, you get to try our own unique hypnosis process, learn about the science, and some journaling prompts. And the best part about this, you'll get a tiny taste of what it's like to go into your hypnotic state bring your subconscious forward, and create new neural pathways while receiving clarity. And the third thing, if you haven't listened to it on this podcast yet, please go back to the episode titled Manifestation 101, where you'll learn the basics of neural manifestation to truly understand this process. So go ahead and check out those free resources, the motivation, the free clarity exercise, and the episode Manifestation 101, all linked below. And in an effort to make sure to have representation in this process series, go ahead and submit any process testimonials you have, especially to our LGBTQ+ community, our BIPOC, as well as the Ys, which is anyone in the community who is 45 and over. All right, we'll be back next week.